Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Foreign Policy Halftime Report, a part of the Atlantic Council's virtual convening series, Elections 2020, America's Role in the World. My name is Roberta Braga. I'm Deputy Director for Programs and Outreach, Adrian Arsh Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council, and I couldn't be happier to be introducing today's event, the wrap-up of an amazing couple of weeks of bipartisan, incredibly timely analyses on key matters related to U.S. leadership and its role in the world. Amid a global pandemic that has altered our realities, anti-racist protests in our own backyard, and economic insecurities that have really transcended borders, the Democratic and Republican National Conventions laid out competing visions for the United States and for what it means to be an American. And though both conventions focused on the US identity and the future of domestic policy, they also alluded to how our next president, whether it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden, may approach foreign policy and America's relations with our friends and allies. And it is these key foreign policy themes and the road ahead to November 3rd that we're here to talk about today. We launched this series with a conversation with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, spoke most recently with Ambassador Robert O'Brien, Assistant to the President on National Security Affairs, and today we close with our series co-chairs, Ambassadors Colleen Bell and Paolo Dobriansky. Today's halftime report will be moderated by our very own Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council. Damon's impressive career has been focused on advancing a Europe whole free and at peace, on strengthening the NATO alliance, and on fostering a transatlantic partnership capable of really tackling global challenges and promoting common values. Before passing the mic over to Damon, who's in our studio now, I do want to remind everyone that you can find everything you need to know about the Elections 2020 series, including any episodes you might have missed at atlanticcouncil.org/elections2020. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Atlantic Council using hashtag ACElections2020. On to you, Damon. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Roberta, for that introduction. And welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's halftime report, as we call it. For many of you, probably like me, policy and politics are your sports or your hobby. And so for us, this passion, we're out of the stretch of the last 2 weeks of the Democratic and National nominating conventions. We're at our halftime report. So today we're going to take stock of where we are on foreign policy issues in the campaign, in a way that's really consistent with who we are, the Atlantic Council, an institution that is committed to shaping the future together, how the United States works with our friends and allies to shape a better future. And today's conversation is going to be between our co-chairs. I am joined on the screen here in our Samsung studios. I'm joined by Ambassador Colleen Bell, who is with us from California live. Welcome, Ambassador Bell. And to her left, we've got Ambassador Paolo Dobriansky, who is joining us from here in Washington. I'm going to turn to them in just a second, but as Roberta said, we have been drawing on the chatter, the input, the comment of all of you during this series. So please feel free, use the hashtag ACElections2020, send us your comments, send us your questions, amplify this debate about what is America's role in the world, how does it relate to this election campaign. Before we start the conversation, I just want to explain why these two women are serving as co-chairs of this endeavor, the Atlantic Council. Ambassador Bell and Ambassador Dobriansky are both, in essence, my bosses. They're both board directors of the Atlantic Council, but they're extraordinary women who bring some common attributes to this whole enterprise. Extraordinary energy and passion about the issues and about America's role in the world. They understand the connection between our health at home and our leadership abroad. They bring a problem-solving ethos throughout their careers, and they bring some fun to these topics as well, a real sense of optimism at a time when there are challenging issues out there. Ambassador Colleen Bell is joining us from California because she's now serving as the executive director of the California Film Commission. I got to know her well when she was U.S. ambassador to Hungary and handled remarkably well a complicated assignment representing the United States at a critical time. She comes from a career of producing television shows that have been really on the leading edge of social justice and social causes. Ambassador Paolo Dobriansky, a longtime member of the Atlantic Council Board, also serves as the vice chair of the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, where we focus on the big issues. She came to the council after having served as the longest ever Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, where she had an extraordinary portfolio with special assignments at times ranging from Northern Ireland to Tibet, point on climate and energy, and a long career in government, over 5 presidents, working at the White House, handling Russia, Ukraine, but many, many issues. She's now a senior fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center. And both of these are Renaissance women, and it's why we turn to you two to help co-chair this Elections 2020 effort. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service, Colleen and Paula. It's a real pleasure. But perhaps if we might, why don't we jump right in? And basically, we finished the DNC last week, the week before, the RNC last week. Let me start with you, Ambassador Bell. The Democrats were first out of the gate. Maybe what would you just offer as a couple of key takeaways, highlights of the foreign policy issues that emerged during the debates at the convention and emerged during this series?
I can, lay out a bit about the Democratic platform. That the party's proposal criticizing China trade practices and proposing less spending on national defense, and opposing what was referred to as these forever wars. As it seeks to lay out the party's foreign policy goals and highlight differences between the Democrats and President Trump. And they also were seeking, I think, the Democrats to bridge the gap between the party's more progressive wing and Biden's more moderate approach. And so the proposed platform, maintains the broad policy priorities of Biden. Democrats took a strong stance against China's trade policies, and that was strong. They also took a stance against human rights, China's human rights record, and also stressed the need to work with international allies to counter China. And in regard to international alliances, which I believe are extremely important, of course, it said that not enough has been done to support our American diplomatic efforts abroad and our international commitments and our relationships with our allies. And in turn, that has tarnished our credibility as a country. So, the Democrats, promised to repair relationships with governments across the world, including Europe and Africa. Vice President Biden has focused many of his foreign policy plans on rebuilding those relationships with allies and cooperating with international institutions, particularly now as we find ourselves here in the middle of a pandemic. So, and also the Democratic platform called for reducing military spending, which was a sharp contrast to President Trump, who has championed an increase in defense spending. And the Democratic position is that we can maintain a stronger defense and protect our security and safety for less. Both Biden and Trump have promised to decrease U.S. troop levels overseas. And on Yemen, the Democratic platform calls for ending support for the Saudi-led war in that country. And on Iran, it rejects a regime change as a U.S. policy goal. So there are quite a few differences when it comes to a foreign policy represented by the administration and the Biden.
Thank you, Ambassador Bell. Maybe Ambassador Dobriansky, I turn to you. We just wrapped up last week the Republican National Convention. Foreign policy is never at the forefront of any particular convention, but what did you see as the main issues of emphasis coming out of the previous week, Paula?
Well, Damon, first, it's terrific being here with you and also with Colleen. And I just want to say it's been a real pleasure to be co-chair with Colleen and participating in this effort put forth by the Atlantic Council. It's just been terrific. Damon, your question, it's interesting because in the Republican National Convention, every day foreign policy had been focused on. Actually, there were countless speeches which had a component and underpinning relevant to particularly the achievements of the Trump administration. I would first start by saying that some of the broad core themes were looking at that it's not just about what you say, but also what actions you take. And I think that the Republican convention really strived to get across that there were a number of promises made and that they've been fulfilled. One, for example, in that area was that many administrations in the past have spoken about moving our embassy to Jerusalem, and that this was something that there have been different views on, but this administration said it was going to do it, and it did it. And then I'd also say there was another underpinning that tied the different days together, and that was the theme of America First. And here I think it was also clarified, what does America First mean? America First does mean about looking at the interests first and foremost of American citizens and what our national security interests are. But it was also clarified that doesn't mean to the exclusion of international engagement and international and America's leadership in the world. I think it was juxtaposed and laid out very clearly how important those components are, but not at the expense of American citizens. And in this regard, a very graphic example that was highlighted was, of course, the push relevant to the very important NATO alliance, and how in the context of NATO, that by advancing and really pressuring that we have to have burden sharing across the board, the burden can't just be on the United States alone, that in this regard, that what you get in the end actually was cited was actually $130 billion that's been put into the alliance. And actually a pledge of $4 billion now by all of the members of the alliance in the year and through 2024. So that was another very core broad theme. Let me just mention a few specifics, if I may, because over each of the nights, what basically transpired were different areas that had been highlighted. Sanctions have been imposed on a number of countries that have really been either have had a very aggressive behavior, have challenged our national security interests. Countries like China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, for example. It was also highlighted about the importance of the military. Colleen mentioned the point about the military in the in the Democratic National Convention. In the Republican National Convention, there was definitely the theme highlighted of peace through strength, and that definitely it was important to up our military. And here, it wasn't only the issue of hardware. This gets into cyber. Also, there was the spotlight about the investment in space and the Space Force, and all that portends for the protection of our national security interests. In the trade domain, there was a spotlight certainly on the upgrading of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, in which the US-Mexico-Canada agreement was concluded. The Middle East loomed large over the days, and we saw Secretary of State Pompeo speak actually from Israel. Here, there was the groundbreaking diplomatic agreement concluded between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, which was truly, truly groundbreaking and has tremendous consequences for Middle East peace going forward. And I already mentioned Jerusalem, which was a promise that was kept. And let me just mention two more. ISIS, the eradication of ISIS here, which was a major area and a major promise relevant to the administration. It spotlighted it. And the taking out of, here in this case, of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And also in this case, in Iran, Qasem Soleimani. That was another theme. And let me just conclude on this note. China, I mentioned the sanctions of China, but China was also spotlighted in quite a few cases, and not only because of the origins of the pandemic, but also because of the kind of predatory trade and economic behavior. So in short, let me say those are the broad themes. Those are some of the specifics. What was interesting to me was that actually every day had a foreign policy component to it.
Paul, I think that's a good point. And perhaps Colleen as well. We know that elections, that foreign policy, national security aren't the driving force behind elections, and yet they did permeate the conversation quite a bit. Let me ask, a lot of people are saying this is one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime. They're contrasting the really different temperaments between President Trump and Vice President Biden. Did you see some areas perhaps of convergence? Could you see some common themes that actually might transcend some of our polarized politics on some of the national security? Paul, do you want to start with that and then Colleen pick that up? Could you find something where there might be actually some common purpose across the aisle?
Well, I will say that even if I may say prior to the holding of the conventions, I think it's worth noting that there has been bipartisan support, which we particularly have seen in the legislative branch, for addressing the really predatory trade and economic behavior of China, and that how crucial it is to address that cannot go unaddressed. There have been some differences over what the specific approaches should be. I'd also add to that particularly with the onset of the pandemic, I think that here you also have the executive branch aligned with the legislative branch and focusing on supply chains. The concern about the origins actually of the pandemic and how and why there should be an investigation. And then that our supply chains, particularly for those kinds of medical equipment or equipment that really has ramifications for our national security and our own America's interests, that need to be revisited, because there was grave concerns, and there are grave concerns about the lack of transparency and how many of the exports from American companies in China couldn't export out personal protective equipment to the United States. So this is one area that even before the conventions, I would say was an area that there's been a kind of support, bipartisan support that has been galvanized.
Thank you.
I would just like, thank you. I would just like to add to Paula's points that there has been bipartisan support too for Russian interference in our elections. So, that is something where, both parties are coming together, recognizing how that impacts our security and our democracy moving forward. So there is shared interest in that. And also the strong disinformation campaigns that have been growing and permeating from some, with malign efforts and intentions from some of our adversaries. So I do believe, like, on those 2 points, in addition to what Paula shared, that there is bipartisan support for that.
And what would you say are the biggest divergences? Is it an issue set? Is it an approach? Obviously, whether we're talking about climate or international institutions, there are some real stark differences. Do you think a particular issue represents the biggest divergence between the two choices the American people face, or is it more of a broader approach? Do you want to continue with that, Ambassador Bell, and then? Sure.
Yeah, I think, obviously there's a divergence on particular focused policies, but I think kind of by and large, it's this move towards, more from multilateralism to unilateralism. So, we have built and participated in many during the Obama years, entered in with good faith with our allies to many agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, with our trade agreements, with the JCPOA, et cetera. And the President Trump decided to withdraw from those. So it's I think one divergence too is this sort of America first, but kind of in terms of, and really a strong reduction in the focus for international engagement in so many ways with our multilateral organizations and otherwise. So I would say that that plays kind of heavily and weighs heavily at this point too, because of the situation that we're in with the pandemic. So as we know, this virus knows no borders, and we will need to work collectively together with our international partners moving forward to meet the needs, both economic and health-wise, that have been created by this pandemic.
Thank you. And Ambassador Dobriansky, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think there are a number of areas of where there are differences. I think in the defense area, as we've already discussed, I think that the Trump administration has been very clear that it's essential to really put and invest in the military, given the kinds of global challenges that exist, that we do have to be vigilant. And so that appears to be one area. A second one is over the issue of burden sharing. I think that this administration felt very strongly that it could not leave unaddressed the question of our alliances, and in particular the NATO alliance, and how crucial it was not just to have the United States take on the lion's share. But I want to say this because here we are at the Atlantic Council, which places an important premium on alliances. I think that also it came out very clearly in a number of speeches that were delivered during the Republican National Convention that alliances and allies are very important. And it's not about disengaging or about unilateralism. It's about how we actually engage on what terms. And in that sense, it's not, moving away from that engagement. But here, I think even in the president's own remarks, he cited NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, and how Stoltenberg very proudly himself said, look, we've moved forward. We've gotten these, not only pledges, but countries have moved forward in terms of their burden sharing. So that was another, and let me just mention a third and the last. And I think it's just the issue over how one approaches, and to use your term, Damon, you said, is it an approach? Well, the approach taken toward international institutions. Here, I think the issue is looking at the investment that we make and American taxpayers specifically put into the investment in multilateral institutions or international institutions, and what do we get from it? Are we maligned? Are we having success on foreign policy? And so there have been some real differences there, I think, between Republicans and Democrats over the investment that's made and how much reliance one makes on those institutions in the conduct of foreign policy.
So I want to ask you more a question about engaging the American people in this conversation. I mean, in large part, we sort of are where we are as a country because a lot of people who don't follow foreign policy or national security every day, over the past years, they saw these the endless wars. They felt sort of the deterioration of the economic fabric, and particularly rural America. We've gone through a great recession, and now we're in a global pandemic that's led to an even more serious economic case. And so the Atlantic Council, our mission is about securing the future together. How does the United States work with friends and allies to shape a better future? And so how do you see, both of you are passionate about this. Ambassador Bell, you've produced shows that reach millions of people with key messages. And Ambassador Dobriansky has been a passionate teacher. She's teaching a class right now at Georgetown, has been passionate about training the next generation. How do you see the ability to engage the American people to understand that engagement in the world can be good for our interests and values, rather than this scary thing that brings us problems all the time? How do you think about that conundrum that plays out in the electoral field? Ambassador Bell?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that we could do a better job of kind of highlighting the importance of globalization and how we've worked towards globalization, how the freedom of goods and services and finances and people and ideas, how that supports economic prosperity and security and peace in the world. I don't know how the word, how globalization, somehow part of it became, it had a negative connotations for so many people, because we really rely on that for prosperity and for peace. And I think that we need to do a better job of sharing with the American people the importance and the benefits of that, and also to be critical thinkers when it comes to consuming news. Unfortunately, there are strong disinformation campaigns that are out there. We know that, but they continue to kind of permeate, and they have the ability to influence public opinion in very, very negative and compromising ways. So Paula, being a teacher, she understands the importance of teaching people about being critical thinkers when it comes to consuming news. And I would say that that's there. It'll happen through education, and it happens through some of the great journalists who are out there reporting accurately and so well on so many of our domestic issues and international and foreign policy issues, and really just trying to create a framework for people that's maybe smaller, because there's so much information out there. But how do we do that? So, and I know that there are a lot of people who are working on that. It's something that I think about kind of all the time too.
How do we meet audiences where they are in this as well?
That's
Ambassador
right, exactly.
Ambassador Dobryansky?
Well, thank you. First, let me go to the Atlantic Council. I think the Atlantic Council has done an incredible job of reaching out in various different ways to the American public through its senior fellows, and the fact that it has so many centers. I mean, the Latin America Center, the Energy Center, the Eurasian, I could go on just listing all of them, and then we'd be taking up the whole time. But the fact is, these fellows get out across the country. And how do they get out? They get out through a lot of different great institutions, like the World Affairs Councils of America. I used to be actually the chairman of the board of the National Board of the World Affairs Councils. There's also the American Committees of Foreign Policy. All of these have networks across the United States, and they bring in think tank experts who get challenged. They get challenged. They get challenged in so many different ways. And then, of course, the universities, and of course, students, because the students represent the next generation. And in this case, I could tell you that the class that I do teach, for example, both I'm at Georgetown and I'm also connected into Harvard. And in both cases, let's just take at Georgetown University, the students, graduate students who are in the school of getting their master's in the School of Foreign Service. In fact, interesting data point, almost all of them are onward into the Foreign Service, which tells you they're interested in foreign policy, they're internationally engaged. So in this case, actually that outreach to the next generation does really matter. And in this sense, I think the Atlantic Council is doing a great service. And I'm positive Colleen feels this way, because that's why the two of us signed up to be together co-chair here, because we're making a difference. We're having an impact and reaching out to that generation.
And could I also add, I just want to also highlight our diplomatic missions around the world and the important work that our missions do and our embassies do in supporting, cross-cultural opportunities and educational opportunities to bring people together. And I just would like to highlight those, because so many talented, amazing people do such good work to build these important bridges.
And
That's
by
right.
the way, I'm going to add one more, and you know what that is? It's interesting. Every administration puts out a national security strategy. And actually, in the national security strategy that was issued by the Trump administration, there's a section that relates to exchanges and how crucial exchanges are. And in this context, this builds upon what Colleen just said, because our students go on exchanges. And there are cultural exchanges, there are sports exchanges. All of these make a difference, that kind of connectivity.
So both of you are ambassadors, and one of the questions that's come into us is acknowledging you're both ambassadors. How can the U.S. use its diplomatic capabilities to reinforce sort of these global governance, global norms, and sort of how do you see the role of the State Department in the next administration, where there's been a lot of talk about investment of civil versus military priorities? Maybe Ambassador Bell first, and then Ambassador Dobriansky.
Well, it's proven that the investment in civil, it comes back to the American people in spades. And I can tell you that these missions abroad are not working with big budgets, I know, but they do extraordinary work on very, very small budgets. And I'm a strong proponent in continuing to invest in our foreign service officers, in our missions abroad, in our diplomatic efforts that come from our embassies around the world. I mean, it promotes peace. They are able to promote economic opportunities, engagement, focus on security, and just the excellent work that they do. It's important that the American people understand how important the work is of our diplomatic missions, and they need the funding, and the funding is well used.
Ambassador Dobriansky.
Thank you. Our embassies abroad are certainly on the front lines representing our national security interests and the interests of America as a whole. And in that sense, I mean, here you have not only foreign service officers who are there, but you also have other agencies, not just the State Department, the Department of Commerce, of course, the Department of Defense, the Department of Agriculture, and it goes on. We have to remember that here, it's not just only the State Department, that many of our embassies represent the whole of government and how crucial it is. And also in that regard, you have foreign service nationals. The key point is that it's on the front lines, just as we really revere our military who are on the front lines and defending us. Also, our men and women in the foreign service, civil service, and foreign service nationals are also at post, particularly looking at America and our embassies and our national interests.
So we've had quite a lineup. We've had some fun over the past 2 weeks. We've had quite a few folks come on board. We kicked off with Secretary Clinton. We wrapped up with National Security Advisor O'Brien, and lots in between. Can you pick one moment or one speaker or one event, something over the past 2 weeks that really struck you, that was a highlight for you in our context of trying to bring out this, give some color to the importance of America's role in the world? Paula, do you want to start, Ambassador Dobriansky, and Ambassador Bell? Absolutely.
I have to say that a highlight for me was the interview with Ambassador Robert O'Brien, who's the National Security Advisor to United States President Donald Trump. And in this interview, I think that he really shared a lot of the kinds of not only achievements of the administration, but he placed a real premium on the importance of our allies, of our alliances, of also the need for economic strength and for military strength. I felt that the interview was very comprehensive, very insightful, and I think a very important message that he conveyed.
Terrific. Ambassador Bell.
It's hard to pick one, frankly, but I always enjoy listening to Wendy Sherman. She is just somebody that I regard so highly, with so much respect, and she always provides such interesting kind of insight and historical perspective on so many of the issues that she's been working kind of on the front line on for many, many, many years. So, it's just a, excellent panel, and I really enjoyed that. And again, just the theme, the overall theme of the need to continue to build and strengthen our international alliances.
One of the questions that's come in to #AC Elections 2020. One of the questions that's come in is about the conversation we had with Secretary Chertoff and Jane Ho-Lute when they talked a lot about the importance of technology and cybersecurity and foreign policy and national security. How do you see technology, which wasn't really thought of as a foreign policy national security issue, now it's front and center? How do you see this as something that the next administration needs to be able to grapple with? How does technology fit into a foreign policy agenda? Ambassador Bell, you're joining us from California, so let's start with you.
Well, technology, I mean, I think it's particularly interesting too when it comes to China and some other, state actors who have proven a strong desire and some success for stealing America's intellectual property. And participating in cyber espionage against American companies. I think that in terms of technology, I think that's something that we need to really focus on. It's a huge economic threat and security threat for all of us. But also in terms of technology in the positive way, what an extraordinary experience to be in election time right now and still, having these modified, due to COVID, so many people teleworking, social distancing expectations, the inability to come together in a traditional convening manner that we've had before through all the other elections of my lifetime, watching how everybody has adapted to meet these new extraordinary circumstances, and we were able to do it with technology.
It is pretty extraordinary that without this technology, we may not have campaigns. We wouldn't be having this. The Atlanta Council would be crippled. It's remarkable how it's empowered the debate in our country right now. I don't feel like we've skipped a beat in the debate.
It's true. It's true.
Ambassador Dobriansky, how do you see the role of technology in foreign policy for the next administration?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I would say that in a way it already has been critical. Certainly the positions taken on China and Huawei, that has already been an issue where already at present the Trump administration has taken a very strong position against, has encouraged our allies, our friends, not to go down that path. So I would say that it already is here. And I think that panel just really magnified how it spans into many areas. The fact of also the investment into our Space Force, which also was highlighted during the Republican National Convention, I think also underscores as well the crucial dimension of technologies. So I think it's already been on the agenda, but it's even magnified at present and will definitely continue to be on the agenda of the next administration.
So we have a few weeks, a few months until the actual election. We talk about in our country October surprises. At the Atlanta Council, we talk about these August surprises when people want to be on vacation. We've seen even this August, whether it's protests on the streets of Belarus, saber rattling in the South China Sea, the dramatic deal between Israel and UAE. The world doesn't just go static as we go into election time. What do you see between now and November? This is coming in from one of our questions, which I think is fantastic. What do you see as the biggest unknown for U.S. foreign policy headed into November? What do you see out there that could really surprise folks on the international stage before the vote? Ambassador Dobriansky, do you want to start, and Ambassador Bell?
That's a difficult question to really answer with precision. And I only say that because we witnessed just literally, in fact, at the time we conducted the interview with National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, there were reports, news reports, about coming in saying that China had claimed that there was a U-2 spy plane that had intervened in military exercises that were being conducted there. Let me just say that, as we know, internationally, there are situations that can arise, on the spur of a moment. At the same time, that also underscores really the importance of our position our position of strength, politically, economically, and militarily. You mentioned Belarus, or maybe in the question it was also mentioned Belarus. And we see that playing out. What does that portend? I think there have been concerns from countries in Europe about what kinds of actions might be undertaken from Moscow. There again, we have sanctions that are in place. And I think that also there have been, when we've witnessed actions that have resulted from inappropriate and malign Russian behavior, we have seen action that has been taken. So I have to say it's hard to predict international affairs. That's the challenge. There can be unpredictably. But what I can say, I do think that we are well positioned in terms of the political, economic, and military foundation to handle it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Bell.
Yes, and I would just like to say too, I agree with Paula that we are well positioned. We are a strong country and with built-in structures to defend and promote our interests. So, and that being said, I don't want to speculate too much on any threats. I think the world is having a tough enough time right now with COVID being here. But, you know, one thing to realize too is despite this global pandemic, you know, conflicts around the world continue to go on. So some of those conflicts, it's business as usual, despite the fact that we are in this you know, critical state. So I would just say that you know, there's always the threat of that is a cyber attack, that type of thing. But moving forward, as Paula mentioned, I mean, we have the institutions in place and our various agencies and structures to hopefully manage and respond to anything that could come up.
And by the way, Damon, if I may just make one qualifying point, you know, when those reports came in about this quote unquote, you know, that a U-2 spy plane. By the way, it's worth noting. I mean, the administration was right in there, and actually, Robert O'Brien in the interview, you know, addressed this. I mean, there was no such crossing over any lines, and so that's the unpredictability. And when you have countries that make unfounded claims and statements. You know, that's why we have to know what we're dealing with. And that's why sanctions are in place in dealing with China these days.
So I want to start to bring us to a close with maybe with two questions we've got here. One came in from one of our viewers that really speaks to something that the Atlantic Council has been grappling with. We call it the Atlantic Council, our work on understanding how the underpinnings of what are the underpinnings of American foreign policy? How does the United States at home influence the United States' role in the world? And so the question is, how does domestic turmoil that's happening across our country, on our streets, how does it influence the United States' ability to lead on the international stage? Ambassador Bell?
Right. Well, in terms of sowing disunity and disruption, we know that there are malign efforts to do that. So so our situation here in the United States, we are stronger and better as a country to defend ourselves when we are more united as a country. And so I hope that with whichever administration goes moving forward, that there's going to be a very, very strong focus on uniting some of the divides that exist within our country, because it does impact and has a potential to negatively impact our national security. And I think more people need to understand that moving forward.
Certainly. Ambassador Dobriansky.
I think there are three factors here. First is one that Colleen just referenced, and that is where you have, as we know, some external forces that have intervened and incited some of the turmoil that we have witnessed in the United States. So I start with that, which I think the second factor is that the very strength of the United States and the approach is the premium that is in fact placed on law and order. And when there are areas of law and order that don't work right, we look at reforms. And that's also part of our process. That's one thing that I think I always hear, particularly from abroad, many speak to our strength. Our strength is that on one hand, we have definitely a rule of law that undergirds our society. We also have that underpinning of law and order, but we also have a built-in system of looking at those areas that might not be working and where we need to bring about some change. And then thirdly, I would also just add that I think here, we always have had a transparency. When you look at other places, that's why people, want to come to this country, because of the transparency, because of the opportunities, because of innovation. So simply put, my view is that I think that actually a lot of what's happened has actually unified our country in some very significant ways.
So I want to just close with by bringing it back to, we're the Atlantic Council. We don't do politics, but we do strategy. And so I just want to bring it back to one of the things I've been working on. Part of what I try to do is figure out, consistent with what we do in our Scowcroft Center, what are strategies that we could find some common ground on for our country. And, when I listen to completely different rhetoric and the political polarization, I do see the potential for thinking about a model for a new sense of American leadership. So let me get your reaction to this, because you hear often, America can't do it all. We don't want to be the world's policeman. The burden is all on us. But you also can't really opt out and just say, we're stepping out of this. We don't want to be part of it. We don't want to, that's going to impact us adversely as well. And we also can't just order people around. The world's changed quite a bit since 1945. I just wonder if, in the midst of really different political rhetoric, a new model of American leadership, and we look how we catalyze solutions, that we're not going to do everything. We're not going to lead everything, but we can be a catalytic power in helping to bring countries together to take on some of the big issues out there systematically, where leadership still matters, but that burden isn't as heavy on our shoulders. And I'm just wondering, I just wonder if the Atlantic Council could, as we develop these concepts of sustainable strategies, do you see the potential for an approach about a paradigm around American leadership in the world that could actually enjoy the support of both sides of the aisle, and probably even more importantly, some of the American public? Let me close just asking you, Paula and Colleen, in that order to comment.
I'm going to take your question, Damon, in a little bit of a different direction. I think we do have the principles and the concepts for American leadership, but I think that I look at the global arena, and I think that one of the spaces that the Atlantic Council has worked on, and actually I think can even amplify and look at expanding, and that is where we have some, not only our traditional alliances, but what I would call our new or expanded alliances. Here, the Council has done a lot of work in the Indo-Pacific. I am someone who's an advocate for the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which comprises Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. I'll give you an example of something that just happened only a couple of months ago. And that was that not only was it the participation level elevated, where in this case, Secretary Pompeo elevated it to the ministers of foreign affairs, which was a very good thing and brought them together. But secondly, there was a meeting that took place that brought in South Korea, that brought in Vietnam and New Zealand. And in doing all of this, what did it do? It actually brought all of these countries together to talk about not just the security issues, but quite frankly, to talk about economic issues, the impact of COVID, and how COVID actually was affecting supply chains. And there were concerns and need to galvanize support. And all of the countries that I've mentioned have had great concerns about China, about its predatory trade actions. So in this case, actually a space that I think is very worth looking at are new alignments and how one can actually maximize on those new alignments and where interests converge. I don't think that we need to look at necessarily set paradigms for operating. I think that we should be more agile and really look at how there is a great deal of movement in this regard.
Thank you, Paula. Colleen, please.
Yes. People do and historically have looked to the United States as a leader on so much, a leader in terms of security, in terms of promotion of human rights, social justice, democracy, etc. I'm proud of the American values. I'm proud of our principles, our institutions, our respect for rule of law. These are things that have translated into significant economic prosperity for our wonderful country. And what we've been able to do with that is to take that and to go abroad and to try to not only influence, but really support other nations, because in so doing that, it helps us overall in terms of the broader picture towards our opportunities for continued and economic prosperity and growth moving forward, and security as well. But I agree with Paula and what she said. It's just our building on our traditional alliances, but also looking for expanded alliances moving forward. That could be a place. And I would also just like to bring it back to where we are, because this is elections 2020, America's role in the world. And this is a point where, as I've been canvassing and reading and talking to all sorts of pollsters and everyone else, the American people, by and large, want more bipartisanship on these important issues moving forward. So, we don't want to let politics, interfere with the bipartisan efforts that are necessary for maintaining, keeping, promoting peace and security in the world, and what that means. So I would just also like to highlight that point as well.
Hey, Damon,
Thank you.
I
Yes,
know
ma'am.
we're concluding, and that was our last question. I just want to also say, because I think, and Colleen made a very important point, and I just want to conclude by amplifying it, and that is our values do matter greatly, and our leadership matters greatly. And I think, as I said at the outset, as I expanded into alliances, I think that very tradition speaks for itself, and that should maintain itself. That's absolutely key. So as you're looking at, I think I heard you say new paradigms, in that is a foundation that remains and should remain the same.
Thank you so much. I have to say, what fabulous co-chairs, Ambassador Bell, Ambassador Dobryansky. This was a fantastic halftime report, if you will. I just want to thank you. You've been just terrific co-chairs of this effort, but also just fantastic partners and leaders of the Atlantic Council. We really appreciate your leadership here and modeling the behavior that I think is going to be so good for our country. So I just want to also close just by thanking all of our audience that's been with us through this series. We want to encourage you, stick with us. You'll see that the tone, the discussions that you find on the Atlantic Council channels might be a little bit different than you see on cable news channels or at the conventions themselves, because we don't do politics, but we do strategy. We do America's role in the world. And at the Council, we believe that we're an inflection point in history, that things are changing so dramatically in the world that the decisions that are taken today will have outsized impact over the coming decades. And as our co-chairs just said, American leadership matters. And our mission is how to shape a better future together. So stick with us at the hashtag AC Elections 2020, and we'll see you back for more programming. Thank you.